Rafi offered you an escape to Europe. Did you say yes?
Why do you care now? You spent 5 years ignoring me.
Because you have a contract with me. You are my wife.
Leena Darzi watched the rare rainfall descend upon the desert through the window of the secluded palace. The droplets created ephemeral patterns on the golden sand, before being absorbed as if they had never existed. 5 years. 5 whole years since she had become the wife of Sheikh Khalid Al-Rahman, in a ceremony that had felt more like a funeral than a celebration. 5 years living like a ghost in a palace of gold. The marriage had been a purely political arrangement, calculated from the start. Her father, Omar Darzi, had accumulated impossible debts after years of business mismanagement. Khalid, the disciplined and ruthless heir to the kingdom of Al-Rahman, had offered financial salvation in exchange for an alliance through matrimony. But there had been a clear condition, established in a contract signed by both parties: a marriage of strict convenience with no expectation or obligation of physical intimacy. To protect your honor and your choice, Khalid had said formally during the negotiations, his dark eyes avoiding hers, you will not be forced into anything beyond the title of wife. At the time, only 20 years old and desperate to save her ailing father, Leena had accepted without fully comprehending the weight of those words. She had thought that perhaps, with time, the marriage could become something real. That affection might bloom where there had only been necessity. She was terribly wrong. Khalid had kept his word with surgical precision. He installed her in this secondary palace, 20 minutes away from the main residence where he lived and ruled. He gave her servants, jewels, generous bank accounts. He gave her everything except his presence, his touch, or any sign that she existed to him as anything other than a fulfilled contractual obligation. In the first few months, she still hoped. She hoped he would come for dinner occasionally, that he would ask about her day, that he would show minimal interest in the woman who carried his name. But Khalid appeared only at mandatory formal occasions: birthdays, religious festivals, events where the wife's absence would be noted and gossiped about. And even then, he maintained a careful physical distance, as if brushing against her accidentally might break some sacred rule known only to him. "Good evening, Mrs. Al-Rahman," he would greet her, his voice neutral, polite, and completely void of emotion. "Good evening, Khalid," she would reply, testing the use of his given name without the title, waiting for a reaction. There was none. Only a courteous nod before he withdrew. Over time, Leena learned to stop waiting for change. She created her own routine in that golden palace, a luxurious prison, but a prison nonetheless. She always woke at dawn when the first rays of sun touched the distant dunes, walking through the fragrant gardens before the brutal desert heat became unbearable. The white roses she had planted herself in the second year now bloomed abundantly, though she often wondered if anyone other than her noticed their beauty. She studied all morning, in-depth history, classical literature, languages no one knew she had mastered. She became proficient in French, Italian, and Spanish through books she ordered discreetly. Not because she had any practical use for this knowledge, but because filling her mind with something other than loneliness was the only way to maintain her sanity. In the afternoons, she embroidered intricate patterns onto fine fabrics or painted watercolors of the desert that shifted color with the light. Gold at dawn, amber at noon, purple at dusk. Each painting captured not just a landscape, but an emotion, infinite vastness, profound isolation, desolate beauty. And at night, when the solitude became a crushing physical weight on her chest, when the silence of the palace echoed so loudly it hurt, she wrote letters obsessively, letters to Khalid that she would never have the courage to send. She kept them meticulously in an ornate sandalwood box under her bed, pages and pages of thoughts she dared not vocalize. Expressions of gratitude for the material generosity that never faltered, mixed with painful questions about why he avoided her so completely and consistently. Observations on how the jasmine in the garden bloomed most beautifully right after the rare rain. Brutally honest confessions about how she felt increasingly invisible, even while constantly surrounded by attentive servants. "Dear Khalid," a letter from 2 years ago began in handwriting that was still round and hopeful. I saw you from afar today through the window, talking animatedly with your advisors in the courtyard. You laughed at something they said, a rich sound that carried across the distance. And I realized with acute sadness that I have never seen you genuinely smile in my presence. I constantly wonder if it is because my presence deeply saddens you, or if I simply do not register to you as a real person. The more recent letters were drastically different, more resigned, devoid of hope, shorter. Khalid, we completed 4 years of marriage today. You sent flowers via a servant, as always. They were beautiful, as always. Thank you, as always. Leena. The servants treated her with all the respect due to a queen, but she saw thinly veiled pity in their eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. Everyone knew the unspoken truth that permeated every corner of the palace, that the Sheikh kept an untouched wife in every sense, that the marriage existed only in carefully drafted legal documents and meticulously maintained public appearances. Worse than the constant loneliness was the growing terrifying sensation that she was gradually fading away, that every day in that empty, repetitive routine erased another essential piece of who she was, or who she could have been if circumstances were different. She was 25 now, and felt as if she were 60, a life already lived without having been truly experienced in any meaningful way. Sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, when relentless insomnia kept her staring at the ornate ceiling, Leena wondered what would be different if she had found the courage to refuse the initial arrangement. If she had let her father face the consequences of his own mistakes alone. If she had riskily chosen poverty with the possibility of true love over guaranteed wealth with a complete absence of affection. But then she vividly remembered her father lying frail in the hospital, his breathing labored, the visible relief on his aged face when she told him she would accept the powerful Sheikh's proposal. She remembered how he lived 3 more relatively comfortable and peaceful years before dying. And she knew, even trapped in that suffocating golden cage, that she had made the morally right choice, even if it hurt deeply. Still, it hurt. The monotony broke unexpectedly on a scorching summer afternoon in the 5th year of their marriage. Leena was in the library when she heard an unusual noise in the main courtyard. Male voices laughing, a sound that rarely echoed in that silent palace. Curious, she approached the window and saw Khalid stepping out of a car accompanied by a younger man she didn't recognize. The young man was noticeably shorter than Khalid, with a lighter build. But there was an undeniable resemblance in their features. The same strong facial structure, the same bronzed skin tone, the same dark eyes. But where Khalid carried the weight of the world on his tense shoulders, this man possessed an infectious lightness, laughing at something Khalid had said. Rafi, one of the servants murmured reverently as he passed her. The Sheikh's younger brother, just arrived from Europe. Leena watched the two enter the palace, feeling something strange in her chest. Khalid rarely brought visitors here, keeping this space rigidly separated from his real life. That his brother was here suggested a shift in the unwritten rules that governed her existence. She didn't see Rafi again for 2 days. Khalid had apparently installed him in a different wing, maintaining appropriate distances. But on the 3rd day, while Leena was painting in the garden at dusk, he appeared. "Sorry to interrupt," he said in fluent Arabic, but with a charming European accent. "I'm Rafi, Khalid's brother. You must be Leena." She stood up quickly, almost knocking over her easel. "Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you." Rafi smiled broadly, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "The pleasure is mine. Khalid mentioned that you paint. May I see?" No one had ever asked to see her paintings before. Leena hesitated, feeling strangely exposed, but then nodded her permission. He studied the watercolor in progress, a desert sunset landscape, with real attention. "You capture the loneliness of the desert perfectly," he commented softly. "The way the sand seems to stretch infinitely, without another living soul in sight. It's beautiful and devastating at the same time." Something tightened in her throat. He saw it. He saw what she had put into the painting without saying it explicitly. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Did you study art formally?" he asked, sitting on the garden bench as if they were old friends. "No. I taught myself, mostly. I have plenty of free time." Rafi watched her for a long moment, something like understanding crossing his face. "The palace is big and silent," he said finally. "I imagine it can be lonely." It was a simple statement, but a validation she hadn't received in 5 years. Tears threatened to spill, and she blinked rapidly to hold them back. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly. "Then perhaps we can be friends," Rafi offered easily. "I feel a bit lost here too. Europe is very different, and I forgot how intense the desert can be." Leena should have refused politely. She should have kept an appropriate distance. But the offer of genuine companionship after years of isolation was a temptation impossible to resist. "Friends," she agreed softly. "I would like that." And so began the change that would transform everything. Rafi became a constant presence in the days that followed. He appeared in the garden when she painted, in the library when she read, on the terrace when she stargazed. He wasn't intrusive. He always asked if he could join her before sitting down. But once invited, he filled the silence with conversation about everything and nothing. He told her about his years studying engineering in Paris, about friends he had made, places he had visited. He asked about the books she read, truly listening to her answers and asking intelligent follow-up questions. He laughed easily at her observations, making her realize she had a sense of humor she had forgotten how to use. "You are smarter than Khalid lets on," Rafi commented one afternoon while they discussed philosophy. "He speaks of you with respect, but distantly, as if you were a valuable work of art in a museum, admirable but untouchable." The comment stung because it was true. "Your brother is a complicated man." "He is an idiot," Rafi corrected with brotherly affection. "Brilliant in business and politics, completely lost in basic human affairs. He's always been like that, even as a child." Leena laughed despite herself. "You shouldn't speak ill of your king that way." "He is my brother before he is my king," Rafi retorted. "And as a brother, I can honestly say he has no idea how to talk to people when it doesn't involve treaty terms or trade agreements." It was strange to hear someone humanize Khalid that way. To Leena, he had always been a distant, unreachable figure. But Rafi saw him as a real person with real flaws. "He is good at what he does," she defended, surprising herself. "The kingdom prospers under his rule." "Yes," Rafi agreed, "but a man can be an excellent king and a terrible husband simultaneously." The silence that followed was heavy. Leena didn't know how much Rafi knew about the unconsummated marriage, about the terms that kept her and Khalid in separate orbits. "He has his reasons," she said finally, vaguely. "I'm sure he does," Rafi replied softly. "Khalid always has reasons for everything, but sometimes reasons aren't justification enough." 3 weeks after Rafi's arrival, a massive sandstorm hit the region at nightfall. Leena was in her room when the winds began to howl, hurling sand against the windows with a force that made the glass tremble. She ran to try and close the heavy shutters, but they were old and stuck. "Let me help," Rafi's voice appeared behind her. Together they managed to latch the windows, but not before a fine layer of sand invaded the room. When lightning tore through the dark sky, illuminating everything in a white flash, Leena shuddered involuntarily. "Afraid of storms?" Rafi asked gently. "Not exactly," she admitted. "But sandstorms always make me feel small, vulnerable, as if the desert could simply swallow everything and everyone." Another flash of lightning, another clap of thunder. She wrapped her arms around herself, and then she felt Rafi's hand land lightly on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. It was a simple, casual, appropriate touch. But after 5 years without physical contact beyond formal greetings, it felt far more significant. Leena froze. Rafi must have felt the tension because he started to remove his hand. "Sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No," she interrupted quickly. "No, it's okay. I'm not used to—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Understanding washed over his face. "How long has it been?" he began carefully. "Since someone touched you? Even casually?" Leena did the mental math and felt something shatter in her chest. "Over a year," she whispered. "Maybe 2. Khalid greeted me with a handshake at some formal event, but other than that, she couldn't continue. That isn't right, Rafi said with contained anger. You are human. We all need contact, connection. It is impossible to live completely isolated like this. It is the agreement we made. Agreements can be renegotiated when they cause harm, he argued. And this is causing harm, Leena. I see it in you. Tears burned in her eyes. There is nothing I can do about it. The contract... To hell with the contract, Rafi exploded, then took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. I'm sorry, I hate seeing you like this, withering away in a gilded cage. In that moment, with the storm roaring outside and darkness enveloping them both, something fundamentally shifted between them. Leena realized this had become dangerous, that she was starting to depend on Rafi's company in ways she shouldn't, that when he smiled at her, her entire day lit up, that his casual, brief touches had become the only real human contact in her life, and that terrified and thrilled her at the same time. When the storm passed and Rafi politely retired to his own quarters, Leena stayed awake all night, staring at the ceiling. She didn't love Rafi. Not yet. But she could easily see how she could love him if she allowed herself. And that possibility was scarier than any desert storm. What she didn't know was that Khalid had watched from his window when Rafi entered her room during the storm. He had seen them silhouetted against the flickering candlelight. He had seen the closeness between them, the ease, the connection that he himself had never established, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: jealousy. Possessive, irrational, all-consuming. Khalid gripped his whiskey glass hard enough to shatter the crystal, cutting his hand, but he barely registered the pain, too focused on the fire burning inside him. Leena was his. Not in any real sense, he acknowledged, but legally, contractually, nominally his. And seeing Rafi filling the space that he himself had created through deliberate negligence tore something apart inside him. The next day, Khalid sent a servant to summon Rafi for a private conversation in his study. When his younger brother appeared, the tension in the air was thick. You need to return to the capital, Khalid declared bluntly. Rafi arched an eyebrow. Why? I thought I would stay here a few months, helping with the new infrastructure projects. Change of plans, Khalid said stiffly. I need you elsewhere. No, you don't, Rafi challenged. This is about Leena. The silence confirmed everything. She is my wife, Khalid said, his voice low and dangerous. On paper, Rafi shot back. But you haven't acted like a husband. You keep her locked up here like a precious object in a display case. And when someone finally treats her like a real person, you can't stand it. You don't understand the circumstances. Then explain them to me, Rafi exploded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like pure cruelty. You keep her trapped in a marriage that isn't a marriage. You don't allow her a real life, but you also don't want anyone else getting close. What kind of existence is that? Khalid closed his eyes, his jaw working. It is protection. Protection from what? From me, Khalid admitted hoarsely. From men like our father, who viewed wives as property. From a forced marriage she never truly wanted. I gave her everything materially, but I never demanded. He didn't finish, but Rafi understood. So you were protecting her from unwanted intimacy, Rafi said more softly. But in the process, you deprived her of any intimacy, even the appropriate, healthy kind that humans need. Friendship, companionship, simple touch. I know, Khalid said, his voice broken. But once the pattern was set, I didn't know how to change it without seeming like I was going back on the agreement, without making it seem like I was forcing her. Have you ever tried simply talking to her? Rafi suggested. Asking her what she wants now, 5 years later? Khalid didn't answer because he had no answer. He had spent 5 years avoiding his own wife out of misguided respect, and in the process, he had created a chasm that now seemed unbridgeable. I'm not leaving, Rafi said firmly. She needs a friend, and if you can't be that for her, then you will allow me to be. It was a direct challenge. Khalid should have ordered him as a king, but as a brother. As a man suddenly aware of how much damage he had caused, he simply nodded. "But keep an appropriate distance," he said at last, his voice taut. "Always," Rafi promised. But they both knew the lines were blurring. In the following weeks, Khalid began to appear at the secondary palace more frequently, always with an official excuse, documents to sign, discussions about property management. But Leena noticed he stayed longer than necessary, that he watched when she and Rafi talked in the garden, that his expression grew increasingly somber. It was Rafi who finally verbalized what everyone knew. "He's jealous," he said while they walked through the orchard. He finally realized what he was neglecting. "It's not jealousy," Leena argued, though it sounded weak even to her. "It's just responsibility." "It is desire," Rafi corrected gently. "I can see it in the way he looks at you now, as if he's seeing you for the first time." Her heart raced uncomfortably. "Khalid doesn't desire me. He never has." "Do you really believe that?" Rafi stopped walking, turning to face her. "Or is it easier to believe you don't matter to him than to face the possibility that he cares but doesn't know how to show it?" Before she could answer, Khalid's voice cut through the air. "Leena." They both turned. The Sheikh was a few meters away, having approached silently. His expression was a careful mask, but his eyes were a storm. "I need to speak with you," he said formally. "Alone." Rafi looked at Leena, a silent question. She nodded minimally, and he walked away, but not before briefly touching her arm in support. Khalid saw it. She saw that he saw it, and tension thickened the air between them. "Walk with me?" he asked, and there was something different in his voice. Less command, more request. She agreed with silence. They walked side by side but separated, maintaining their habitual distance. But this time, it felt different. Charged. "Have you been happy?" Khalid asked abruptly. The question caught her off guard. In 5 years, he had never asked about her happiness. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I have everything I need materially." "That is not what I asked." Leena stopped walking, turning to face him finally. "Why are you asking this now, after 5 years?" "Because," he began, and then stopped, his expression struggling with something. "Because I look at you with my brother and I see something I never see when you are alone. Lightness. Joy. And I realize I may have erred in ways I did not intend." It was closer to an apology than she had ever received from him. "You kept me in a gilded cage," she said softly, without accusation but with truth. "With all the best intentions, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless." "I know," he admitted hoarsely. "And I do not know how to undo it. How to change the dynamic we established without seeming like I am violating terms. Without making you feel pressured." "You could start," she suggested tremulously, "by treating me like a person, not an obligation or a responsibility. Just a person." Something passed over his face. Hope, perhaps. "I would like that," he said finally. "I would like to try." But before he could continue, a servant interrupted urgently, whispering a message in Khalid's ear. His expression hardened. "I must deal with an emergency," he said rigidly. "But, Leena, can we continue this conversation?" "Yes," she agreed. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, do more. But then he simply nodded formally and left. Leena stood in the orchard alone, her heart painfully conflicted, because part of her wanted to believe Khalid could change, that their marriage could become something real. But another part, the part that had kept unsent letters for 5 years, feared a hope that would inevitably lead to disappointment. And there was Rafi, kind, attentive, present in ways Khalid had never been. She didn't love Rafi yet, but she easily could, if she allowed it. What she didn't know was that a choice would soon be forced upon her in a way she never anticipated. Because Khalid, consumed by jealousy and work, was about to leave on a diplomatic trip that would keep him away for 3 weeks. And in that time, Rafi would make a move that would change everything. On the night before Khalid's departure, there was a formal dinner. It was the first time Khalid had asked Leena to eat with him since their disastrous honeymoon years ago. Rafi was also present, and the tension between the three was palpable. Khalid drank more wine than usual, his dark eyes shifting between his wife and his brother. Leena pushed food around her plate, having no appetite. Rafi tried to keep the conversation light but met resistance. "You seem happy," Khalid said suddenly to Leena, the words coming out abrupt. "Have you finally found someone who looks at you the way you deserve?" It was an accusation and a question mixed together. Leena froze, her fork suspended in the air. "Khalid," Rafi began in a warning tone. "No!" Khalid cut him off, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor with a loud noise. 5 years. For 5 years I respected her, protected her, gave her everything she asked for. And the first person who shows up and pays her attention, He didn't finish, but the implication hung in the air, poisonous. Tears burned in Leena's eyes. But she forced herself to remain seated, her spine straight. "Rafi is my friend, nothing more." "Friend," Khalid repeated bitterly. "And me? What am I?" "A husband on paper," she replied, and though her voice was soft, the words cut deep. "But you never tried to be more than that. You never asked what I wanted or needed. You simply decided for me and expected me to be grateful." His mask cracked. "I was protecting you." "From what?" She exploded finally, her voice rising. "From intimacy? From connection? From the possibility of having a real marriage? You didn't protect me, Khalid. You isolated me. And now that someone finally treats me like a human being, you can't stand it?" The silence that followed was absolute. Khalid looked at her for a long moment, his jaw working, hands clenched into fists. Then, without another word, he left the dining hall. Leena finally let the tears fall. Rafi moved to comfort her, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "No, please, I need to be alone." She ran to her room, locked herself in, and cried like she hadn't cried since her father died. Because she realized a devastating truth. There were feelings on both sides now. Khalid clearly felt something, even if it was only possessiveness. And she still didn't know what she felt for him. Anger, frustration, sadness for everything that could have been but never was. But underneath it all, there was still a desire for him to finally see her. Really see her. And that made the situation with Rafi infinitely more complicated. The next morning, Khalid left for the capital without saying goodbye. The 3 weeks that followed were the most confusing of Leena's life. Without Khalid's presence, the atmosphere in the palace shifted. Lighter, but also more dangerous. Because Rafi intensified his attention in subtle but undeniable ways. He found excuses to be near her constantly. Casual touches lasted seconds longer. Gazes lingered until she looked away. And in his eyes, she clearly saw what he felt. "Leena," he said one night while they watched the stars from the terrace. "I know it isn't the appropriate time, but I need to say something that has been on my heart." She should have interrupted him. She should have set a boundary. But part of her, the part that had starved for real connection for years, wanted to hear it. "You deserve better than this," he continued softly. "You deserve a man who looks at you and sees a gift, not an obligation. Who touches you with affection and doesn't avoid you as if you were forbidden." "Rafi," she began weakly. "Let me finish," he asked. "I know he is my brother. I know it is complicated. But I cannot stay here watching you wither when you could bloom. So I am making an offer. Run away with me." The shock hit her like a physical wave. "What?" "The border is 2 hours from here," he said urgently. "I can take you there tonight. From the border, I can take you anywhere. Europe, America, wherever you want. Khalid cannot force you to remain in a marriage that exists only on paper. You have a right to freedom, to a real life." It was everything she should want. An escape from the golden prison. The possibility of starting over with someone who clearly cared. "There is no guilt in seeking freedom," Rafi pressed, seeing her hesitation. "There is no sin in choosing happiness," Leena stayed silent for a long time, looking at the stars. Part of her wanted to accept, wanted to run, escape, finally live. But then, she thought of the ring she still wore, a symbol of a vow that, however flawed, had not yet been officially broken. She thought of Khalid, of the suffering she had seen on his face that last night. She thought of the unsent letters hidden under her bed, years of thoughts directed at a man she had never shared them with. "I need to think," she said finally. "It is a huge decision." Rafi nodded, though she saw the disappointment on his face. "But think fast. Khalid returns in days, and when he returns, will you be able to think clearly with him here?" He was right. Khalid's presence always clouded her thoughts, mixing anger with a confusing desire for approval that shouldn't matter anymore. 2 days, she promised. "Give me 2 days to decide." 2 days, he agreed. That night, Leena couldn't sleep. She lay awake turning possibilities over in her mind. She imagined a life in Europe with Rafi, freedom, adventure, the possibility of real love. She imagined staying, more years of loneliness, or perhaps possibly, a chance to finally have a real marriage with Khalid. By dawn, she had made her decision. But before she could act, a servant knocked on her door. "His Majesty requests your immediate presence in his office." Her heart sank. Had Khalid returned early? When she entered the office, she found not Khalid, but his head assistant, an older woman with a grave expression. "There is something you need to know," the woman said. "About the true reasons for the marriage of convenience, and about instructions Sheikh Khalid received from his father before he died." She pushed an old box across the desk toward Leena. "These were found in his personal safe while we were doing inventory. We believe you have the right to know the truth." With trembling hands, Leena opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Letters from Khalid's father to him, written shortly before he died. She read the first one with bated breath, then the second, the third. And with each page, a devastating realization grew. The father, acknowledging on his deathbed how cruel he had been to his own wife, had begged Khalid never to repeat the mistake. Never take a wife as your own until you are absolutely certain she comes to you of genuine will, not out of duty or pressure. Respect her above all else, even if it means keeping a distance that hurts. For forcing intimacy she does not desire would be the greatest violation possible. Khalid had kept Leena untouched, not out of a lack of interest or desire, but because he knew she had accepted the marriage under pressure, to save her father. And his own father's final instructions forbade him from taking advantage of that situation. He had been protecting her from being forced, and in the process, he had created a different but equally painful prison. Tears fell onto the old paper, staining the ink, because she finally understood. She finally saw the man behind the cold mask, and she realized she didn't want to run away. She wanted to confront him. She wanted to yell at him for being a noble idiot. She wanted to demand that he ask what she wanted instead of simply deciding for her. She wanted a chance to build something real, even if it started 5 years too late. But when she ran upstairs to find Rafi and decline his offer, he was already gone. He had left a simple note. "I was wrong. You were never mine to take. Forgive me." And then, worse news arrived. Khalid was returning that day, and he was coming accompanied by lawyers. Because during his trip, consumed by jealousy and convinced he had lost Leena to his brother, he had decided to perform what he thought was a final act of mercy, offering a divorce. Leena had 2 hours to prepare before Khalid arrived. 2 hours to decide exactly what she would say, how she would confront the man who had wasted 5 years of both their lives out of misguided respect. When she finally saw him stepping out of the car, she had to hold onto a table to stay upright, because even now, even after everything, he still stole her breath. He still affected her in ways Rafi never could. Khalid entered the office where she waited, followed by 3 serious-looking lawyers carrying documents. "Leena," he said formally, but she saw extreme exhaustion in his face. "I apologize for not giving you prior notice, but I have made a decision that I believe is best for both of us." He nodded for the lawyers to position the papers on the desk. "Divorce papers," he continued, his voice carefully neutral. "I've read them. You will find I am more than generous. Half of my personal fortune, this palace in your name, a lifetime allowance, and a letter of personal recommendation for any future relationship you choose to pursue." The last part was said with a tension only she noticed. "You are giving me a divorce," she said slowly. "I am setting you free," he corrected, "from a marriage that should never have existed on these terms, from a promise I kept too rigidly, from a prison I created thinking it was protection." It was everything she had asked for, silently, for years. Complete and unquestionable freedom, and she didn't want it one bit. "And if I don't want a divorce?" she asked softly. Khalid froze. The lawyers exchanged confused glances. "Leena," he began carefully, "you don't need to feel obligated. You don't need to protect my feelings. I know my brother offered an alternative, and I don't blame you for—" "Rafi is gone," she interrupted. "And even if he hadn't left, I would have refused his offer. Because," she took a deep breath, gathering her courage, "it isn't Rafi I want." The silence in the room was absolute. "I spent 5 years in this palace writing letters to you that I never sent," she continued, her voice gaining strength. 5 years, hoping you would finally see me, that you would ask what I wanted instead of deciding for me. And today, when I finally read your father's letters, I finally understood why you kept your distance." "But Khalid," she stepped closer to him, forcing him to look into her eyes. "What he asked was that you respect my consent, not that you deprive me of any possibility of choice." "I was trying to do the right thing," he said hoarsely. "I know," she replied softly. "But you asked me once if I was happy. The answer is no. I wasn't happy for 5 years. But not because you gave me too much or too little materially. It was because you gave me everything except you." His hands were trembling visibly. "I don't know how to be what you need." "Then learn," she challenged, "or let me go for real. But do not make a decision for me again without asking what I want." "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to tear up those papers," she said firmly. "I want you to send the lawyers away. And then I want you to kiss me for the first time as if you actually want to. Not out of duty, not for politics, but because you desire it." "Are you sure?" he asked, but hope was dawning in his dark eyes. "I've had 5 years to be sure," she replied. "Now it's your turn to be brave enough to want it." For a moment that felt like an eternity. Khalid just looked at her. Then, slowly, he turned to the shocked lawyers. "Get out," he ordered. "Everyone, now." They hurried out, leaving the papers forgotten on the desk. When the door closed, Khalid finally closed the distance between them. He took her face in his large hands, a gesture surprisingly gentle. "I spent 5 years believing that respecting you meant keeping my distance," he confessed. "But I was hiding like a coward, afraid that if I let myself get close, you would see the real man beneath the king, and that the real man wouldn't be enough. Let me be the judge of that," she whispered. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a ceremonial or hurried kiss. It was slow, deep, heavy, with 5 years of repressed desire and regret. It was a plea for forgiveness and a promise simultaneously. When they parted, both breathing heavily, Leena saw tears in the corners of his eyes. "I will spend the rest of my life making up for lost time," he swore. "Knowing you, loving you the way I should have from the beginning." "Then start now," she said, taking his hand and guiding him out of the office, up the stairs toward the quarters she had occupied alone for 5 years. "Leena," he said uncertainly as they reached the bedroom door, "you don't need to, if you aren't ready." "Khalid," she interrupted firmly, turning to face him. "You spent 5 years protecting me from something I didn't need protection from. Now let me choose. And I choose this. I choose you. I choose to finally have a real marriage." He studied her face for a long moment, searching for any sign of doubt. He found none. "Then," he said softly, opening the door and guiding her inside, Allow me to do it right this time. What followed was a night that healed 5 years of loneliness. Khalid was surprisingly gentle, incredibly patient, worshipping every part of her as if she were precious beyond value. Every touch was reverent, every kiss adoring, every whisper against her skin telling her how beautiful, desired, and loved she was. For Leena, who had never known intimacy of any kind, who had remained untouched all those years, it was a discovery. There were moments of uncertainty, of nervousness, but Khalid guided her through everything with a care that made her heart melt. "I am here," he murmured against her ear when she tensed, "and I will never rush you. We go at your pace." And when they finally joined completely, it was with a tenderness mixed with passion that made tears stream down her face. "Are you okay?" he asked, immediately worried, stopping. "More than okay," she assured him, pulling him closer. It's finally real. Finally, we are real." Later, lying intertwined in the sheets as the golden dawn painted the desert through the window, Khalid kissed her forehead softly. 5 wasted years, he said with regret. "Not wasted," Leena corrected. "Just necessary. For both of us to grow into people who could truly choose this." "Still," he argued, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm, "I intend to make up for every lost day." "We have time," she replied, resting her head on his chest. "We have the rest of our lives." In the months that followed, the transformation was visible to everyone in the palace. Khalid moved into the secondary palace, stating he didn't want to be separated from his wife for even a single night. The servants saw them walking through the gardens holding hands, laughing at things only they understood. The queen began accompanying him on diplomatic trips, not as a silent accessory, but as a genuine partner. And when, 8 months after that transformative night, doctors confirmed that Leena was pregnant, Khalid's joy was palpable. "Our child," he said with awe, kneeling before her, a reverent hand on her still flat stomach, "will be born of true love, of choice, of the real marriage we fought to build. And will be loved," Leena added, running her fingers through his hair, "by parents who finally learned that respect and intimacy are not opposites, that protection does not mean distance, that real love requires vulnerability and courage." Khalid looked up at her, his eyes shining. "You saved me from becoming my father, from repeating his mistakes in different but equally damaging ways. And you taught me," she replied softly, "that waiting is worth it, that sometimes happy endings come 5 years late, but they arrive nonetheless." Years later, when their son ran through the gardens Leena had once walked alone, and Khalid pulled her into a spontaneous dance on the terrace where she used to watch the stars in solitude, she finally understood. The marriage hadn't begun when they signed the contract 5 years ago. It began when they finally had the courage to confront mistakes, admit vulnerabilities, and choose each other genuinely. And that choice, made freely by both, was worth all the lost time. Because sometimes real love isn't about perfect beginnings. It's about having the courage to begin again, to transform a cage into a home, to learn that it is never too late to choose intimacy over protection, connection over distance, a real life over an empty existence. And when Khalid kissed her under the stars that night, with their son sleeping safe inside the palace and a whole future ahead of them, Leena knew with absolute certainty. It had been worth the wait.